Thank you. Thank you, Harvey. Beautiful. My, that was wonderful. You know, about 3.5 years ago or so, on Monday, August the 21st, 2017, about three and a half years ago, there was a remarkable phenomenon that we all know about, but we probably don't remember that exact day. And the phenomenon was an eclipse, a total eclipse of the sun. And what made this so remarkable was the fact that this total eclipse of the sun was seen all across the United States. It started on the West Coast and worked its way back to the East Coast, all the way across. And that's what made it remarkable. Because we know about eclipses. We've seen eclipses from time to time. They happen. But they're not normally a total eclipse of the sun. You see, an eclipse is like a cosmic billiard shot, somebody said. It's where the sun and the moon interact, and the moon gets in front of the sun and thereby causes an eclipse for us. We don't see the entire portion of the sun. But on this particular day, back in 2017, it was a total eclipse. It totally blocked out the sun across the U.S. Now that happens roughly every 90 years. So while it's been about 90 years since that happened, it will be another 90 years before it happens again, as far as the U.S. is concerned. And that's one of the wonders that God has permitted us to observe. It is something that doesn't happen frequently, as I say, and when it does, it's remarkable. And what the schools did, this was interesting to me, what the schools did in our nation was most of them, especially the younger children, the schools, the elementary schools closed down. They had a lockdown. Why? They didn't want their students to go out and look up and maybe be blinded. You know, when I grew up, I was taught, well, just never look at the sun no matter what. You know, use a piece of paper and a pinhole and all that kind of thing. But today they don't trust the students, apparently. It's probably pretty smart, I think. But they don't trust them not to look up and damage their eyes, their eyesight. Now, some of the schools gave glasses. They had these special glasses made up, and some of the schools handed out these glasses to the students, and they went outside and looked at it and had kind of a science, whatever you want to call it, time, that they observed the eclipse. But most of them didn't. And so for a period of time, the earth grew dark across the U.S. I mean, it was just like almost midnight. It was dark in the middle of the day. And it got colder. The temperature dropped. Now this was August, remember. The temperature dropped about 10 degrees. Why? Because the sun was blocked out. And we count on the sun for our warmth, don't we? That's where the warmth of everything comes from, the sun. Now God, all through the Bible, works miracles, doesn't he? We know about the Red Sea and how he let the Israelites walk across the Red Sea as he held it back for them. We know about a number of others, miracles. We know about the water coming out of the rock, about the Nile turning into blood because of his hand. We know about Jesus feeding the 5,000. And this is one of the biggest miracles in the Bible, I would say. The one I'm going to talk about today. It pertains to the time when the sun stood still. Let that sink in for a minute. The sun stood still. Think about that. Let's look at this in Joshua chapter 10. Let's see what the story is in Joshua 10, starting with verse 1. Joshua 10. And you can follow along there if you prefer in your order of service. It's there as well. It says this. It says, now Adonizedek, the king of Jerusalem, heard that Joshua had taken Ai. Ai was a town, okay? Ai. Had taken Ai and totally destroyed it, doing to Ai and its king as he had done to Jericho and its king. And that the people of Gibeon had made a treaty of peace with Israel and were living near them. He and his people were very much alarmed at this, because Gibeon was an important city, like one of the royal cities. It was larger than Ai, and all its men were good fighters. So Adonizedek, the king of Jerusalem, appealed to Hoham, king of Hebron, Piram, king of Jarmuth, Japhia, king of Lachish, and Debir, king of Eglon. Come up and help me attack Gibeon, he said, because it has made peace with Joshua and the Israelites. Then the kings of the Amorites, the kings of Jerusalem, Hebron, Jarmuth, Lachish, and Eglon joined forces. They moved up with all their troops and took up positions against Gibeon and attacked it. The Gibeonites then sent word to Joshua in the camp at Gilgal, do not abandon your servants. Come up to us quickly and save us. Help us, because all the Amorite kings from the hill country have joined forces against us. So Joshua marched up from Gilgal with his entire army, including all the best fighting men. The Lord said to Joshua, do not be afraid of them. I have given them into your hand. Not one of them will be able to withstand you. After an all-night march from Gilgal, Joshua took them by surprise. The Lord threw them into confusion before Israel, who defeated them in a great victory at Gibeon. Israel pursued them along the road going up to Beth Horon and cut them down all the way to Azekah and Makkedah. As they fled before Israel on the road down from Beth Horon to Azekah, the Lord hurled large hailstones down on them from the sky, and more of them died from the hailstones than were killed by the swords of the Israelites. On the day the Lord gave the Amorites over to Israel, Joshua said to the Lord in the presence of Israel, O sun, stand still over Gibeon. O moon, over the valley of Ajalon. So the sun stood still, and the moon stopped, till the nations avenged itself on its enemy. As it is written in the book of Jashar, the sun stopped in the middle of the sky and delayed going down about a full day. There has never been a day like it before or since. A day when the Lord listened to a man. Surely the Lord was fighting for Israel. Then Joshua returned with all Israel to the camp at Gilgal. May God bless the reading and the hearing of his holy and sacred immutable word this morning. Wow, that's quite a story, isn't it? Quite a story. You see, there are 5 kings involved here. They are known as the Amorites collectively. 5 kings. And these kings had seen what Joshua and what the Israelites had done, both to Jericho and to the city of Ai. They had basically destroyed both of them, had taken them with God's help. God empowered them to do that. We know the story of Jericho so well, where the walls fell down. And Ai was pretty much the same thing, although it's lesser known. The story of the Battle of Ai is found in Joshua chapter 8. Don't go there now, but it's a wonderful story to read. And so as they saw what the Lord and the Israelites were doing to these cities, they became concerned. And Gibeon was a prize city, as it says. It was a very important city. And the Gibeonites were very concerned about it. Why? They wanted to preserve it. Anybody would want to preserve their city. They don't want to see it torn down, burned down, defeated, all the things that go with that. And so they reached out, as we would say today, they reached out to the Israelites. And eventually they enacted a peace treaty with them. They said, hey, let's get together and form an alliance, you and us. And so they were a little bit deceitful in doing that. They went to the Israelites and they pretended to be foreign emissaries from a foreign country. And they said, we want to have a peace treaty with you. We'll do anything you tell us. Because they knew the power of Israel as long as God was with them. And they said, we'll be your servants. If that's what you prefer, we'll be your servants. We'll do anything if you'll help us, if you'll be part of this alliance that we want to form. So these 5 kings, the Amorites, I again emphasize, the Amorites, now these were the kings of cities that most of them we know. We know about the city of Jerusalem, certainly. But remember, this is in the time of Joshua, and this is roughly 300 years before Jerusalem becomes the center of the Israelite temple, worship, everything that is bound up in the state of Israel, the nation of Israel. So this is 300 years prior to that, roughly 1300 BC. You remember David comes along in 1000 BC, and he talks to Aranah, who is the Jebusite there in Jerusalem, and he says to Aranah, he says, I'd like to buy this threshing floor from you. I just want to use this threshing floor. I have a purpose in mind. And of course, that's what becomes the eventual site of the temple, the Holy Temple, for the Israelites. But this is 300 years before that time. So we have the king of Jerusalem. We have the king of Hebron. Hebron is just south of Jerusalem a little bit. Jarmuth, Lachish, and Eglon. Those are lesser known cities. But these are all a large number of people that are involved in this territory, the Amorites. And the Amorites are not friendly with the Israelites. And that's apparent. And they're not friendly with now the Gibeonites. They want to attack the Gibeonites because they want to take over another city and occupy it. And that kind of sets the stage for all of this situation that's going on here. And it's just pretty much like today, the enemies of people like us, of Christians and Jews, don't like us. They're not friendly with us. Why? Because we represent what's good, and they represent what's evil. We shine the light on evil. Why? Through God's Word. And they don't like that. They don't like to be highlighted. We're a threat to their wicked and sinful ways. We're all that stands between chaos, in many cases, and evil and wickedness. And that prevails in much of our world today. And even in our country, it prevails in certain instances. Look at Portland, Oregon. Why in the world do they attack that city every night? Why? Ask yourself that. I don't know. We expose the darkness of sin. That's who we are. That's what we do. Now, God could have allowed the Gibeonites to take this battle on by themselves. They were strong men. It says that in the text. They were strong fighters, but they weren't sufficient to go up against these 5 kings, the armies of these 5 kings collectively. They were not strong enough to do that, and they knew that. And so they appealed to Israel. They said, hey, can you fellows come down and help us? We need some help from you. Now, the Israelites were camped at a place called Gilgal. Gilgal is about 26 miles distant from Gibeon, 26 miles away. And what's interesting about that is 26 miles is just exactly what the marathon is that we run today in the Olympics or in other track and field events. 26 miles is a long distance. And so when the Gibeonites send this message to the Israelites and they say, can you come help us? Well, this is a long way to go, 26 miles. And Joshua gets the message, and he goes to his army and he says, fellas, we're going to go do this. We're going to help them. And so the remarkable part of this is that the army of Joshua marches all night long in full battle gear, full battle dress. Think about that, 26 miles. They march all night long and they fight all the next day against the Amorites. Now that is something that's remarkable in itself. 26 miles. It's hard enough to walk 26 miles, much less in full battle gear and much less at night. How could they do a thing like that, you might ask yourself? Well, God empowered them to do that through supernatural ability. That's the only way you can explain it. It had to be a supernatural strength and energy and whatever you want to call it. Pumped them up and got them there on time and in time to take on the armies of these collective 5 kings, these collective 5 armies. God can do remarkable things. In Romans 8:28, it says this. It says, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him and have been called according to his purpose. Now the Israelites love God, and they were called according to his purpose. At this point in time, they were following God pretty closely. Why? They were under the command and control of Joshua. And Joshua was a good leader, an effective leader. And he led them. He continued to lead them in the same spirit that Moses had. And the Israelites at this time are taking over the land of Canaan. So this is a very positive time in the history of Israel. You know, sometimes we make mistakes and do the wrong thing, but God looks down upon us and helps us, even at times like that, doesn't he? And helps us through the rough times, even when we make the wrong decisions, when we go take the wrong path, maybe. Let's look at verse 6 of this chapter that we're looking at, Joshua 10. It says this, it says, the Gibeonites then sent word to Joshua in the camp at Gilgal. Do not abandon your servants, they say. Come up to us quickly and save us. Help us, because all the Amorite kings from the hill country have joined forces against us. You can sense the immediacy in that communication, can't you? The fact that they're anxious, the fact that they have anxiety. Why? They're about to be overtaken and captured and probably killed. They were ruthless in those days. It was not a good thing. And so again, Joshua and his army break camp. They march this 26 miles up there, and they finally reach the point where they can confront the army. And in verses 12 to 14, it says this. This is where the battle takes place. On the day the Lord gave the Amorites over to Israel, meaning that he intervened and assured Israel the victory, Joshua said to the Lord in the presence of Israel, O sun, stand still over Gibeon. O moon, over the valley of Ajalon. So the sun stood still and the moon stopped till the nations avenged itself on its enemies, as it is written in the book of Jashar. The sun stopped in the middle of the sky and delayed going down about a full day. There has never been a day like it before or since, a day when the Lord listened to a man. Surely the Lord was fighting for Israel. So there are a lot of things that go on here. I mentioned earlier today that we sing this song, I Sing the Mighty Power of God, the hymn that we love, and the hymn that's been around for so long. That's a powerful hymn, and it parallels what's going on here with Joshua and the army in many ways. This is the way it goes. I sing the mighty power of God that made the mountains rise, that spread the flowing seas abroad and built the lofty skies. I sing the wisdom that ordained the sun to rule the day. The moon shines full at his command, and all the stars obey. What a beautiful song that is. Now, a fellow named Isaac Watts, who was a remarkable songwriter, wrote that back in the 1700s. He didn't write it based on this story about the sun standing still. He wrote it because he was concerned about children learning about God. And he thought, if I make this a simple song, which he did, and talk about God's creation and the sun and the moon and the stars and things like that and the mountains, the children will understand that. And they do. And we still have this hymn around today, praise the Lord. 1700s to today. Not many hymns last that long. I hate to say it. Some wonderful hymns have come and gone over the years, but this one has persisted. This one still lasts. And like I say, he wasn't thinking about this battle at Gibeon when he wrote this. Well, what happened in the battle at Gibeon? Think about that. As I say, the Israelites and the Gibeonites got there and surprised the enemy. They attacked the enemy, the Amorites, at dawn, took them on. And as they're going down the road to Beth Horon, it says, God rains down hailstones on them. They're fleeing. They're trying to get away from the Israelites. And God sends these hailstones down. And it says the hailstones killed more of them than did the swords of the Israelites. A remarkable thing in itself. So God is fighting for them and with them. But as they go along, they realize that they're in dire straits, the armies of the Amorites. And so they go on down the road further until they come to these other towns that are mentioned here, Azekah and Makkedah. And then they kind of, if you will, hole up in those towns. They set up defensive positions in those towns of Azekah and Makkedah. And the Israelites know that they have to exterminate them, wipe them out. Why? Because these Amorites are vicious people. They'll come back and attack again and kill the Israelites and the Gibeonites if they don't take care of them. And so that's why Joshua prays. Notice he prays to God. And he says these wonderful words. O sun, he says, stand still over Gibeon. O moon, over the valley of Ajalon. He's praying, God, will you do this? The reason is, I need to have the daylight extended so I can see what I'm doing. My army needs to be able to see where these guys are, where we can confront them and kill them, take care of them. Will you do that, Lord? Will you give us daylight for another X number of hours, whatever it may take to wipe them out, to clear out this situation? And that's why Joshua prays that prayer. And God does that. God permits the sun to stop in the middle of the sky and remain there and shine so that Joshua and his army can confront the Amorites, can defeat the Amorites, can destroy the Amorites. And that's exactly what they do. They take care of the entire army. They wipe them out. All the armies of the 5 kings are destroyed. They're now defunct. They no longer exist. Now, this in itself is remarkable. Now, here's what people say. They say, well, you know, if something like that, something that remarkable happened, if the sun stood still in the sky for that long a time, it should be somewhere in recorded history. Surely some people somewhere must have written that down. And indeed, if you go to the annals of all places of Mexico, there's something in Mexico. There's something that's called the Journals of Cahutalan. I can't even pronounce it. But those journals go all the way back 1,300 years before Christ. And they make mention of the fact that all of a sudden, during this particular day, the sun stood still. They couldn't figure it out. They didn't know what was going on. They didn't understand it. But the day was extended, they said. There's another document called the Midrashim. The Midrashim. The Midrashim is a journal, if you will. It's a kind of a commentary on the Bible, but it supplements the Bible. And the Midrashim is kept by the Israelites, by the Jewish nation, by the Jewish people at that time. The Jewish are very thorough, you see. They document everything. I've told you about genealogy. They love to keep track of genealogy, but they keep track of history, and especially of Jewish history. Why? It's the story of their lives, the story of their nation. And in the Midrashim, it mentions that the sun stood still for over 18 hours. It says that explicitly. And in other journals of other nations, there aren't many, there are only several, but enough to validate that this actually happened. Now, to me, the most remarkable part of this is something I'm going to read to you now. And it's something that we would never expect, or I would never expect, if I hadn't read this. And I want to share it with you. Because you see, the fact that the sun stood still over Gibeon, and the moon stood still over Ajalon, is confirmed by, of all organizations and all peoples, by NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. It was confirmed in the year 2000. Let me read it to you. You see, at NASA headquarters up in Beltsville, Maryland, Beltsville is about 50 miles from here north. You go north on 95, take the Beltway around, and you'll come to Beltsville. And at NASA headquarters is where they, quote, deconflict the satellites. What do I mean by that? Every satellite that we launch into orbit, is deconflicted with all other satellites that are already up there. Think about it. There's a lot of satellites going around the Earth all the time. And more are going up every day from other nations, from China, you name it, from India, from wherever. They're putting up satellites, and more will continue to do that. But NASA wants to deconflict its satellites, meaning keep them away from all the satellites that are already there, and all what they call space junk. There's a lot of space junk up there, things that have fallen off of other satellites or space stations or whatever. And so, with that as a background, there was a fellow by the name of Dr. Harold Hill, who was a consultant for NASA in 2000. And this is what he wrote in a book, Dr. Harold Hill. He was the president of Curtiss Engine Company in Baltimore, Maryland at that time, and a consultant in the space program. And he said this. He said, I think one of the most amazing things God has ever done happened to our astronauts and space scientists at NASA headquarters in Greenbelt, Maryland. And it's this. And he goes on to explain it. He says, they were checking the position of the sun, moon, and planets out in space, where they would be 100 years and 1,000 years from now. We have to know this so we won't send a satellite up and have it bump into something later on in its orbit. We have to lay out the orbits in terms of the life of the satellite and where the other satellites will be so the whole thing will not bog down. Well, they ran the computer measurements back and forth over the centuries, and it came to a halt. The computer that they were using stopped and put up a red signal, which meant that there was something wrong either with the information fed into it or with the results as compared to the standards they were using. They called in the service department to check it out, and the service department said, what's wrong? They found out that there was a day missing in space in elapsed time. That bogged them down. They scratched their heads and tore their hair, and there was no answer. Finally, a Christian man on the team said, you know, one time I was in Sunday school, and they talked about the sun standing still. While they didn't believe him, they didn't have an answer either, so they said to him, show us. He got a Bible and went back to the book of Joshua, where they found a pretty ridiculous statement for anyone with common sense. It said, there they found the Lord saying to Joshua, do not be afraid of them, for I have delivered them into your hands. There shall not be one of them able to stand before you. Joshua was concerned because he was surrounded by the enemy, and if darkness fell, they would overpower them. So Joshua asked the Lord to make the sun stand still. The sun stood still and the moon halted and did not go down for nearly a whole day. Then the astronauts and scientists at NASA in Greenbelt said, there is the missing day. They checked the computers going back in time, and it was computed and found that it was close, but not close enough. The elapsed time that was missing back in Joshua's day was 23 hours and 20 minutes, but not a whole day. They read the Bible again, and there it was, about or approximately a whole day. The words in the Bible were important, but they were still in trouble, because if you cannot account for 40 minutes, you'll really be in trouble 1,000 years from now with your satellite. 40 minutes had to be found because it can be multiplied many times over in a satellite's orbit. As the Christian employee thought about it, he remembered somewhere in the Bible where it said the sun went backwards. The scientists told him he was out of his mind. But they got out the Bible and read these words in 2 Kings that told the following story. Hezekiah on his deathbed was visited by the prophet Isaiah, who told him that he was not going to die. Hezekiah asked for a sign as proof. And Isaiah said, do you want the sun to go ahead 10 degrees? This is on a sundial now, sort of a primitive sundial that they had. Do you want the sun to go ahead 10 degrees, Hezekiah? Said, it is nothing for the sun to go ahead 10 degrees, but let the shadow turn back 10 degrees. In other words, prove it to me. So Isaiah spoke to the Lord, and the Lord brought back the shadow 10 degrees. This is the passage from 2 Kings chapter 20, verses 8 through 11. Hezekiah had asked Isaiah, what will be the sign that the Lord will heal me and that I will go up to the temple of the Lord on the third day from now? Isaiah answered, this is the Lord's sign to you, that the Lord will do what he has promised. Shall the shadow go forward 10 steps, or shall it go back 10 steps? It is a simple matter for the shadow to go forward 10 steps, said Hezekiah. Rather have it go back 10 steps. Then the prophet Isaiah called on the Lord, and the Lord made the shadow go back the 10 steps it had gone down on the stairway of Ahaz. You see how this works, functions? 10 degrees exactly is exactly 40 minutes. 10 degrees is exactly 40 minutes. 23 hours and 20 minutes in Joshua, plus 40 minutes in 2 Kings. That makes up the missing day. All in the universe. Rather amazing. You know, we look at authenticity and validity and everything that we do, don't we? And we're willing to accept an account or report that can be verified and validated. And the Bible has verified and validated this missing day that the scientists at NASA headquarters found. We are blessed by having God's Word. There's no question about that. Because it confirms not only the power and the existence and the authenticity, the sovereignty of God, but also the literal truth of the Bible. So we are the beneficiaries of all of this. Lucky us. I sing the mighty power of God that made the mountains rise, that spread the flowing seas abroad, and built the lofty skies. I sing the wisdom that ordained the sun to rule the day. The moon shines bright at his command, and all the stars obey. May God be ever praised. I would invite anyone who wishes to come this morning and give your life, your heart, your soul to Jesus Christ. Anyone who wishes to dedicate your life or recommit your life, rededicate it. Anyone who wishes to come and have a word of prayer or a word with me or testimony, whatever it might be, we're going to stand and sing a hymn, a beautiful hymn. Will you stand with me, please?